What is
Yeah.
up, Matt? It is so good to see you, man.
It is an absolute pleasure and honor to be on with you, Jeff. And just regardless of what we're going to talk about, as someone who has known you for a long time, I couldn't be prouder of
Thanks,
what
man.
you have done, the content of the book, it's just the topics that you're talking about. And so just kudos, man. Really big
Thanks, man.
congratulations.
Thanks. Well, I'm glad you're here because, quite frankly, I wasn't going to do either of the 2 days if you weren't here. So, ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Engler, he saved the entire event single-handedly.
Oh,
Um, I want to talk to you about ownership, and
sure.
obviously, outside of maybe Jocko Willink, I can't think of anybody who comes to mind faster for me on the topic of ownership than you. And we've talked about this over
Yes.
so long that we've known one another that I really wanted to dig into it. The topic today is really exploring the 8 commitments of the team. The things that if you were to have your team commit to these 8 things, that you would see a team with high trust, high care, high psychological safety that is able to achieve incredible things. So I thought about ownership. I thought that's something where if you had a team full of people that owned what it is that they do, what could that be? So I
Powerful.
wanted to start out by asking you when I say ownership and when you think of the concept of ownership, how would you define it and what does it look like on a team when you have ownership throughout like the top to bottom levels?
Yeah. And I would say at the outset, and again, this goes back to a lot of our conversations, Jeff. I'm heavily influenced in thinking about ownership by Jocko and
Yeah.
his book and just how he seems to talk about it is even from the beginning before the book was even out when he talked about ownership, just it always resonated with me how he structured it, the framework that he put to it. And so yeah, there's kind of two aspects that really come to mind. And first is at the individual level. It's a mindset, it's a framework, and it's an approach that can be applied in almost any area. And I think that's one of the things that I really liked about the concept of ownership, because it felt like this knob or this lever that you could turn or pull regardless of what you were facing. I mean, yes, business context and team leadership, but think about anything that you're approaching or up against in life. How do you insert ownership in there? And so it's an opportunity to invite responsibility for what is happening to you. And I think, sometimes we do that naturally given the circumstance or the position that we may be in. But by and large, what I find, and as you and I have discussed, that's something that is not there automatically, something that needs to be developed and infused. And so when you kind of take that and then apply it to the thinking around, well, how do I infuse ownership on a team, and how do I as a leader of a team think about ownership? It really is as simple as, regardless of who my people are, the circumstances that we are encountering, and the outcomes that we're hoping to deliver, ultimately the buck stops here, and it is with me. And I think it's like you have to start there, and then you can start to develop nuance as you drill deeper into your particular situation.
I love that you brought up, even at the outset of this, talking about it as a mindset. And I loved your kind of visualization of it as a dial that you could turn up and down. Because I've always thought what's interesting about ownership is that you don't need permission from anyone to take a position of ownership over your work, over what you're doing, whatever, because it is purely in your mind how you relate to your work.
Yes.
And the thing that I don't want to say I've struggled with, but I spend a lot of time thinking about is that, we've known each other for a long time. And I've always seen you as someone who takes an incredible amount of natural ownership. From the day I met you, it felt like that was infused into your bones in the way that you approach your work. And I think that I'm a little bit more spotty about it. I don't approach everything with that sense, but the things that I'm really into, I have a very high degree of
Sure.
ownership. And I've tried to cultivate it more and more in myself. Where I've spent a lot of time thinking about is, well, how do you make that happen? How do you manifest that in other people? Because it's easy to say, well, just take ownership over it, right? Like it's a thing, you just say it and everyone will do it, right? But you have a team and everyone's going to
Yes.
come to it with their own baggage around, the type of coaches they responded to, the type of teachers, the way that they showed up in classes, the way they showed up at church, wherever it might be. You
Yes.
have these roles where you may or may not take ownership. So I'm wondering what you think is the pathway that you've seen is most effective at cultivating ownership in people. Is it lead by example? Is it training? Is it one day you just say something and it clicks for someone? Like, How have you seen it work in being able to transfer that sense of ownership to people on your team?
I think there's two parts to it. And one without the other, I think you won't be able to really cultivate that environment of ownership in the way that you would want to as a leader. And I'll give you an analogy. We're big basketball guys. We talk basketball a lot. So you think about the triangle offense, right? Phil Jackson. There is a framework and a system and a things that must happen for the triangle offense to generate the type of results that they would want on a basketball court. At the same time, what you're allowing a Kobe Bryant to do versus someone who is maybe more of a role player coming off the bench is a bit different. There's nuance in then how you apply that. And I think it's true with ownership as well. I think there are things that must be in place. You start at the very beginning, the Simon Sinek, you start with why, right? So is the why there and available? Is the mission clear? Have people, and I love the fact that alignment just came before this, right? Are you cultivating that sense of alignment? I think there are these mission critical things that must be in place to then build upon. And I love that you said people are bringing all different kinds of things to the table. And you have to understand that. And you can't just apply this framework in the same way all the time to every single person. So you need to lay the solid foundation, but then you've got nuance as a leader. And I actually think that's one of the most exciting things about leadership is that it's not rote. It's not the same thing for every person. Yes, we're driving towards a standard outcome and hopefully we're all doing it together. But I love trying to figure out the different nuances and tendencies of my team. And so you really need to then build connection, understand what motivates that particular person. Also, what is their propensity for ownership? That's not a value statement, but different people have different competencies in a variety of areas. And some you mentioned, maybe I naturally gravitate towards that, whereas maybe for you, that's not the standard operating procedure. That's neither right nor wrong. So as a leader, one, being able to understand that that's not a wrong or right thing. But then two, what do I then need to do to ratchet that up a bit? But it all starts with laying that foundation. Have the why, is the mission clear, is the team for each other? And then you can start to develop a little bit of nuance in really having someone own what's in the role or the project that they need to achieve.
I love how time and time again throughout all of the discussions I've had, how much there is a common theme that there's a bit of a foundation building that has to happen, and it so naturally aligns with the things that I put in the book around care, trust, and safe travels. That when you have the environment where you've got, because again, to even get to alignment, to get to communication guidelines, and to get to safety and protection, all of that is folded into having a sense of at least connection with the people you're working with, a
Absolutely.
sense of trust. And how are you going to even hold someone accountable if there's not already that sense of trust and safety? And I was going to take us to the point of accountability, which is there's such an overlap between accountability and ownership. How do you see those two things playing together? And I guess what I'm really trying to get at with that question is, do you think that it's possible to create a sense of ownership in every single person that you work with on your team? And I'm wondering how accountability may factor into that, if that's part of the way you get there.
I love the question. So I think that you certainly can. I think again, you come back to there's probably different propensities that a person is naturally bringing to the table. But what struck me in the question as well is like how much there's an overlap between the two. And I actually feel like the more that we can distinguish and pull them apart gives us more access to actually having both.
Oh, go deeper on that.
So
Explain
so
what you mean by that.
so for example, I think as a leader, we talk about accountability all the time, right? How do we have our teams be more accountable? How do we insert what we're missing here is accountability. However, if you do not have a team or an individuals on the team that has a true sense of ownership, what are you holding them accountable to? Not what not what they've chosen. And I think you got to read the tea leaves a little bit as to where we are. Let's talk about 2022, for example, and labor and what the workforce as a whole. I'm painting with a bit of a broad brushstroke, But one of the major things that seems to be creeping up in a lot of my conversations, or as I'm recruiting, and what do people want, this concept of autonomy, a choice, a say, more power in designing what their day to day is. You don't just layer accountability on top of that. That's a recipe for disaster. So you need to extract ownership from accountability first and foremost, work on having a team of owners. And then as a leader, then you have easier access to layering on accountability. Well, no, we've already talked about and you have already shown what you're willing to own. So now the accountability conversation is, oh, we said we were going to own X. We're over here at Y. How do we close that gap? But that is very much individual or team led versus top down autocratic from the leader. And I think that's just a lot more powerful.
It's interesting because the way you just spoke about ownership there and that in separating them out, it feels a little bit like there's an overlap between ownership and consent. That essentially,
Hmm.
if you don't get someone to own a thing, if you don't get someone to authentically, truly take ownership over the thing that they're doing, then they're almost reluctant participants in the activity. Whereas when you have ownership, they've fully consented and therefore are more open to potentially inviting in that accountability conversation
Well,
because they've given their word to it a bit.
well, and it's a longer term view. I mean, you can have, I think you can almost, with brute force, even put together a high performing team that operates for a short period of time. But unless you're getting that consent, unless that person is opting in because you as the leader, you've sold the mission, you've established the why, you've done the process of trying to gain alignment, unless you have all of that and that person has made that choice, long term you're not going to have to be able to produce the results that you would like. And I dare say you will not have a high performing team 1 year 2 years from now down the road at all.
So, last question I want to ask you about with ownership is, again, this book is for new managers.
Yeah.
And I believe that taking a sense of ownership in your role, taking a sense of ownership in any area, um, really gives you a little bit of extra fuel and a little bit of extra oomph that you need to make a thing happen, right? And I think a lot of new managers go into their role and they feel very much like they're a visitor. Like, I don't know if I necessarily belong here. And that may make it difficult for them to create ownership on their team. So forget about the team for a second. I know that's the focus of what we're talking about today here, but I think it's difficult in the same way it's difficult to love others if you don't love yourself. It's
Yeah.
difficult to take care of others if you haven't taken care of yourself. If you don't have a sense of ownership yourself, it can be difficult to model that so that your team sees it and to be able to see the opportunities to be able to inspire it in others. So, the point I want to kind of close out on with you on ownership is thinking about that new manager looking
Hmm.
for early opportunities to find that sense of ownership. How do you recommend they keep an eye out for those sorts of things? You recommend that they look for big, bold actions to take ownership of, maybe small tiptoe steps into ownership? Should they be challenging authority? Should they be working with people on their team? Like, how do you recommend if you had a junior manager on your team, where would you look for that first step of ownership?
That's a great question. And I don't know necessarily that there's a right or wrong answer here, but I'll say how it kind of occurs to me. I've really, especially over the last few years, um, enjoyed even in just my personal life, tinkering, experimenting, trying, uh, thinking about things in a very iterative process. And I think what I would try to communicate, especially to a junior manager, is let's not try to go big and bold right off the bat, but how can you take something that you're passionate about and show you are willing to try and fail, try and fail, try and fail, iteratively improve. And the only way that you can do that, by the way, is having a strong sense of ownership, because you're taking accountability. There's a taking accountability for, I didn't quite yet achieve the outcome that I wanted. You're transparent that has then happened. And then here, because I am an owner, there's always a next step I can take to try to either improve, course correct, or then now achieve the outcome. And I think as people see a leader, one, being willing to take that step, two, never stop, three, own the results regardless of what they might be, I think you start to slowly but surely build and cultivate that environment where people can step in and do the same exact thing. There, we've had this safe environment phrase appear, multiple times as people have come on. You create that safe environment for people to join in with that as you, and take that sort of same ownership. So that's how I would probably encourage a more junior manager just starting out to approach it.
I love it. It's such a good thing because when people on the team then model that behavior, you get into a lot less blaming and finger pointing. You get a lot more people taking ownership over what happened and stepping up to try and correct it. And when you multiply that out across the entire team, I don't think that it's a big leap of logic to see how that makes a team that's going to be higher performing, that's going to be more resilient, that's going to fill in gaps and catch errors earlier, and who are going to support each other no matter what the case. Because even if somebody else is faltering, if you have that sense of ownership, you're going to step in to help them. So I
Totally.
think it's so critical that teams commit to that sense of ownership and that leaders look for those opportunities to cultivate it.
Absolutely.
I think the
Absolutely.
tips you've given here have been like super helpful for how to start that. And both you and I just mentioned at the beginning of this chat, Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership. I would recommend that to people. I know you would recommend it as well.
Very
Um,
much.
One of the things this launch event has done for people is created an extremely long book list for them to read.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you the final question before
Yeah.
I bring on my next guest. I only have 2 minutes left with you, which, my man, I miss you. It's so good to see you. Um, Lovable leader, it's a term that came to me before I even had the outline of the book, but it resonated. And I
Yes.
felt like it would resonate with other people. So when I say the term lovable leader, who from your past or from your present comes to mind for you? And why does the term lovable leader get labeled on that person for you?
Yeah. It was a fun exercise to not put too many parameters around that. When you ask the question, just like who like that came to mind, and then I kind of pulled on that thread. And so there's two people very quickly. So one, actually, when we were working together in our consulting days, his name is Henry. And what I really appreciated about him was that it he was a person who gave me some of the most honest, brutal, but in a great way, like
Mhm.
direct
I remember him.
feedback that as someone who is just starting their career, I literally think about to this day. And as I look back, what a joy and a privilege to have someone who was not afraid to tell me what I needed to hear, regardless of whether I liked it in the moment, because I knew he cared that I was able to take that next step. And then someone that I don't know, but I really enjoy following and listening and reading. Michael Hyatt comes to mind. Was another person that came to mind. And my love of
Yep.
productivity and that sort of thing. But what he has done in terms of trying to equip the leader as well, and I think you've got vision. You've got, but once again, someone that I think shows everything that you've talked about over the past 2 days, and it really encompasses. And I have just gotten a lot out of now reading a lot of what he has put out as well. So those are the two that really come to mind.
Excellent. Those are really good ones. And I agree knowing both of the people you're referencing. So, man, thank you so much for coming on and being part of my launch event. I absolutely love you and I appreciate you coming on and sharing what you can about ownership. Again, thanks so much, man. I hope to be in touch soon.
Absolutely, love you too, brother. Have a good
See you,
one.
man. Bye bye.